Hello friends and family. The first video today that I'm making will be discussing JJC Smart's text, Sensations and Brain Processes from the Mind and Body unit of 3-4 Philosophy. This is probably the most difficult text for me personally, as it's quite confusing, so hopefully I can explain it in a way that makes it easier for you to understand. Now sit back, relax, get a coffee and take notes, because I'll tell you how to take notes in a way that'll make it easy for you to understand. The only pre-knowledge you really need for this text is you need to understand that physicalism and materialism are the same thing. So sometimes on exams or questions it will say materialism, sometimes it will say physicalism, but it's just, you need to remember that they're the same thing, otherwise you can get confused. And physicalism is the theory that the mind and body are one thing, and the mind is the brain that's just an aspect of the body. So Smart believes that the mind and the brain are the same thing, and he is a physicalist, so his theories are physicalist. So the text is broken down into two parts, a series of hypotheses, and then the second part is a series of objections which he goes through. So I'll go through the first part of the text first. So he begins the text by speaking of a yellowish orange after image. Now, I didn't know what this was, and it took me like the whole year to figure out that, you know those YouTube videos you would watch when you were little, where it was like, stare at this image for 30 seconds and then see Mona Lisa appear on your wall, and then there's like a vague kind of thing of Mona Lisa like on your wall. That's what an after image is. So Smart makes 4 hypotheses about what this after image actually could be and how, you know, what actually is it. The first hypothesis he makes says that the sensation that we're seeing is not actually real and we're not seeing anything at all. Now Smart rejects this and he says, no, there is actually something going on. This is not true. The second hypothesis he makes is one of behaviorism, which is just saying that maybe we're experiencing a behavior and seeing the after image is just a behavior. Wrong. Smart rejects this as well, and he says it's not just a behavior. There is actually something going on again. The third hypothesis is a dualist hypothesis, and it says, well, maybe it's just a spiritual or mental thing that we're seeing that can't be reduced to the physical. Wrong. Smart says no, this is not true for 2 different reasons. The first reason being Occam's razor, which says the simplest answer is the correct one, and the fact that it could be something spiritual or mental is not a simple answer, so it couldn't be that. And he also says no because of something called a nomological dangler, which is basically something he calls, if it falls outside the scientific realm, if there's no scientific explanation, it's a nomological dangler. And Smart disagrees with anything that falls outside the scientific realm. That's something that is really important to remember about his theory, is that it's based solely on science, and he acknowledges in the text that science isn't fully there yet to discover what his theory is saying, which we'll get to, but he doesn't agree with anything that could possibly fall out the realm of science as we know. So those 3 hypotheses that he rejects, write those down and write some brief summaries for them, because there is a chance you might get questions on it, like outline one hypothesis that he states at the start of his text. And the 4th hypothesis is the one that he actually agrees with, and this is his theory. So hypothesis number 4 is a materialist argument. Remember, that's the same as physicalism. And it says sensations, such as seeing an after image, are nothing more than brain processes. It's just something happening in the brain that we can see. And this is his theory. His theory is that sensations are just brain processes. And because he believes the mind and body, the mind being the brain as well, are just one, when we see an after image, it is just mechanisms in the brain that we can see because our body works as one. So his main argument is that sensations equal brain processes. Sensations are brain processes. A sensation is a brain process. It's the same thing. They're not 2 different things that are similar. They are the exact same thing. You can think of it like how materialism and physicalism, they're different words, but they're the same thing. That's what he thinks about sensations and brain processes. So Smart has an analogy that he uses to explain the semantics of his theory, and it's called the lightning analogy. So he talks of lightning and electrical discharge, and they're the same thing. And even though you say two different things, it still means the same thing. Lightning is electrical discharge. A brain process is a sensation, and he uses the word is to communicate the strict identity between the two. They're two different words, but they're the same thing. And so you can use the lightning example as a way to explain how language is used in his argument. So semantics and language is something that is quite confusing throughout his text, and something that is really, really important to remember is the word brain processes and sensations don't mean the same thing. It's when you report a sensation, when you report seeing this after image, you're reporting seeing a brain process. So there's a distinction there that you need to make. The words don't mean the same thing, but when you report seeing a sensation, you report a brain process. And this is identity theory, which means any mental state is identical with some kind of brain process. So the mental state of a sensation is a brain process. So that is pretty confusing, but write this definition down. Sensations and brain processes are only identical if they are spatially and temporarily coexistent. So they're only identical if they exist at the same time. They're only identical when you see an after image. When you see that sensation, then it is a brain process. Not just when you're talking, they don't mean the same thing. Okay, so that is the first part of the text done. And now I'll move on to the second part, which is when he goes through 6 objections, actually 7, but we only need to know 6. And he has replies to them as to why these objections are wrong. So the objections are basically things that he made up that people might hypothetically respond to his argument. Objection 1 is that an ordinary person or an illiterate peasant could talk about sensations but know nothing about brain science. So Smart has 2 replies to this, and the first one is that if A and B are identical and someone knows of A but doesn't know anything about B, it doesn't mean that A and B still aren't identical. It's just a matter of knowing or not knowing. And the second part to his reply, he uses something called the morning star, evening star thought experiment, which basically means that a group of people in, say, New Zealand could see a star in the morning and call it the morning star, and a group of people on the other side of the world could see the same star and call it the evening star. They call it different things, but it is still the same star. The second objection is that Smart's theory is a contingent fact, which means it's dependent on something else for it to be true. So we can't really know if sensations are brain processes. Smart's reply to this is that it doesn't prove that a sensation is not a brain process, only that it's possible that it's not. Objection number 4, remember we skipped number 3. Objection 4 says after images don't occupy physical space, like brain processes do, so they can't be the same. Now there's a standard form argument for objection 4 that you should write down. Premise 1, after images are not in physical space. Premise 2, brain processes are in physical space. Conclusion, therefore, an after image cannot be a brain process. So Smart's reply to objection 4 says that the objection doesn't match the situation. He's not saying that after images equal brain processes. He's saying that sensations equal brain processes. Objection number 5 says that brain processes can be slow or swift, but an experience of seeing an after image can't be described as either, so they're not identical. Smart's reply to this says that words we use for experiences may mean different things, but they still refer to the same thing. So objection 5 in the reply is another example of how language and semantics are quite confusing in his text. And a reply to this also is the someone and the doctor thought experiment. So the someone and the doctor thought experiment says that we can say things about someone that can't be said about the doctor. But if we are saying someone, it doesn't mean we're not referring to the doctor. Objection 6 says that sensations are private while brain processes are public, so they aren't identical. And Smart's reply to this says that reports of experiences have different logic and language to reports of brain processes, and it doesn't mean that they're not still identical things. And the last one is objection 7. And objection 7 says, I can imagine myself as a stone, yet I still have sensations. And Smart's reply to this is, we can imagine a lot of things, like that lightning is not electricity, or that the morning star is not the evening star, and it doesn't mean that it is true. Okay, so that is all the objections, and that's the entire text done. So I'll just give you a quick summary with a few points that you should write down on just basically his whole argument. Number 1, he thinks that sensations are the same as brain processes. Number 2, he has a materials view and he objects dualism. Number 3, he dismantles hypotheses about what we are describing when we see an after image. And number 4, he speaks about identity theory and defends it through objections and replies. And the last thing I'll quickly go through is if you get a question asked about evaluating Smart and his arguments and theories, there are 3 things that you could probably talk about to come up with a good evaluation. So the first one you could talk about when you're evaluating him is how his entire argument appeals to the authority of science. Number 2, you can talk about Mary and the black and white room thought experiment, which you have notes on. So just read through that and you can use that when evaluating him, because that is an objection in itself to his argument. And the third one is QUALIA, which goes hand in hand with Mary and the black and white thought experiment. So that's also on the notes, so you read through that as well. Thank you for watching my video. I hope it was kind of informative.